Simon Otto, Head of Character Animation at DreamWorks, and on How to Train Your Dragon.
Right.
Simon, before starting on the movie, on How to Train Your Dragon, you're Head of Character Animation. Did you do certain sessions on how to train your character animators or something like that?
We did, actually. It's funny.
You did?
Yeah.
For How to Train Your Dragon?
Well, we did something like flight school. We called it flight school.
Okay.
And, it's a corny way of saying that we actually had to learn everything about bird flight, like bats and birds and things like that. So we did about, every animator had to go through a 2-week course where they had to study the anatomy of birds and bats and do some live action studies, as well as doing like 3 different types of tests. One was a simple wing flap cycle, a landing, and then a takeoff. So it was sort of a way to fully understand what it takes for a creature to take flight, and to sell the idea that there's air surrounding the wings, and that vibrations and turbulence and things like that. So it was a really great time to actually really dig your heels into the subject matter.
Which is your favorite scene in the movie?
Oh, it's the moment when the boy meets the dragon. It's this
in the beginning.
Yeah, well, it's about 1/3 through. It's at the end of the first act, or I guess the beginning of the second act is when they.
Yeah, but the first time he meets him.
It's the second time when they befriend each other. When they. It's a moment where Toothless, the character, goes from a sort of a reptilian character to a more feline, sweet creature that's a little more magical. And I think that scene was sort of the heart of the movie, because it not only convinces Hiccup that there's something special about the dragons, but it also convinces the audience to fall in love with the character as much as Hiccup does, which then sort of brings in the emotional aspect of the movie. And I think for us animators, that was the most important or series of shots in the movie.
So I'm sure when you're living with the movie for like so many years, right? Three years.
I was on it for 3.5 years. Yes.
3.5 years. I'm sure you're day and night. You're thinking of different actions, different ways to perform your characters. What goes on in your mind when you're working on a film that is so great?
Well, an animator is first and foremost somebody who observes, right? When we perform a scene or create a character, we're trying to create a reality that doesn't exist. So we're pushing pixels around or geometries, and our job is not only to tell the story in an entertaining way and in a clear way, but it's also to make the audience forget that they're looking at something that doesn't exist. So the way we do that is by observing life in general. So when I walk through a train station, I'm constantly observing people and characters and types and stereotypes and sort of things that interest me, things that entertain me. And so whenever you're sort of given a subject matter to fully explore, which were dragons and Vikings, you really have to dig your teeth into that. And so what we did, we did a tremendous amount of research on birds, on reptiles, but also on the human characters, And so when you have to get something, and you're under somewhat of a pressure to find something that's interesting, you're constantly absorbing this in the real world. So I think the biggest work of an animator is observation, because everything, the giving it back and creating animation is really a matter of making right choices and understanding the technique that's behind it.
Right.
And the experience.
But in the case of dragons, you don't even have reference video.
Yeah.
To observe.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And so what we did for dragons was we played a game of mix and match. Where there's a dragon that looks a bit like a mixture between a crocodile and a dog, a bulldog. And what we did is we looked at bulldogs
or the dinosaur kind of birds.
Yeah. And so T-Rex or emus for different dragons. So for each of the dragons, we found different types of references that could help us get the idea of what this character needs to be like, and we wanted to draw from reality so that we can caricature it ourselves and fully understand it.
So, do you love dragons? I'm not talking about after doing the movie. Before doing the movie, was it like, did you have any special fascination for dragons?
Not really, not particularly. I mean, I think the world was always interesting to me, and the projects that have been done before, you know, from starting with Pete's Dragon, the Disney movie, to you know, to the more live action films. You know, like I love the dragon in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Is it getting too bright? You know, like all those movies, really meant a lot to me in my upbringing as a kid, and so that's for sure that. And then you know, obviously, you know, like I love Japan, for example, as a culture, and you know, there's a lot of dragon motifs in that culture. But I wasn't particularly a dragon fan. You know, I mean, Chinese.
I'm sure now you are.
I'm. You know, it's funny. Every time you do a different movie, you know, your eyes are open to things that you haven't really looked at before, and that would be one of them, you know. And before, you know, in other movies I had similar, you know, I worked on The Prince of Egypt, you know. Now Egyptology is now much more interesting to me because I have a sort of a connection to it, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, so that happens on every movie.
That's great. And as head of, I mean, as could you give some advice to aspiring Indian animators who are young students on how to approach character animation?
Well,
I mean, we know that everyone says you should observe everything, but what other tips could you share for the students?
Yeah, you know, like it's the most important thing is to not think. Even though you do look at realistic things and you do a caricature of it, is to forget that mechanics, even though it's very important, the goal of a great scene is to make it entertaining. And sometimes that's where animation is great. You don't necessarily have to be always correct, you know, and you have to break the rules. So I think the most important thing is you understand the rules, the principles, and then be free and confident enough to either use them or break them. But so I would say the most important thing for an animator is understand the sense of the scene, like really what is the scene about, and then find the entertaining idea. To me, find one entertaining idea in there, and that could be instead of walking straight through a door, he walks and turns around once before he walks in because he needs to look back
if someone's looking.
He left his wallet on the, you know, simple things that may not be in the purpose of the story, but simple things like this that can give it a much richer quality. You know, and it's funny when I watch like television, you know, television series, what they often do is they put characters next to each other and they just talk. And that's tremendously boring. So we as animators, sometimes we are given scenes like that, and then you have to find that one object around you that can make that scene interesting. And you know, if I could show you some, I mean, there's tons of great examples. And if you look at the old Disney movies, for example, for me, who were the most inspiring scenes, you always find an idea in each scene. Or Nick Park's films, you know, like
there's so much personality to each character that they behave, they perform, and
and draw from life. I mean, find something that you remember, you know, the way your uncle moved, the way, you know, anybody you know in your life. Don't come up. I think the most important thing not to do is to do something that other people have done, because then you're falling into a cliche. You have to do like remember a character or act it out yourself, or find something that is truthful to you, not to somebody else.
Thank you so much.
Great.